Obianuju Ekeocha is a UK-based biomedical scientist and founder of Culture of Life Africa, a pro-life initiative defending the sanctity of life in Africa. It's an initiative dedicated to the promotion and propagation of the gospel of life in Africa. And Obianuju joins me now. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Peter, for having me.
Can you just begin by telling us what was it that inspired you to take up pro-life work in the first place?
Right. So it all started back in 2012. I was, working as a biomedical scientist in the NHS. I had a job. I was happy. I felt everything was fine for me until one day I saw a project that was being promoted by Melinda Gates. Now the ex-wife of the billionaire Bill Gates, the Gates of the Gates Foundation. So she was promoting this huge, expensive contraception project, trying to raise funds within Western countries and among Western donors to take to African countries in order to provide contraception, what she was calling contraception project for women, and she was taking it to the various African countries. So that really touched a sore spot in me. And then I thought to myself, no, I must raise awareness about this. And I started speaking about it. But of course, once I started speaking about it, I started being called upon to different countries, to different African countries, to get a closer look at things. So I was doing a lot of traveling, a lot of studying, a lot of speaking with people, trying to learn from the various African countries to see how they were reacting and to all of these. And then it also brought me to the knowledge, really, and the realization that it wasn't just about Melinda Gates promoting this sort of culture among African countries. It was actually about a bigger picture where there were Western actors, Western nations, Western ideologues who were very much vested and interested in spreading a specific worldview that had to do with spreading contraception, spreading the knowledge of abortion, bringing in, graphic comprehensive sexuality education and things like that. Like this highly sexualized worldview from, if I could call it, the sexual revolution from the West.
From the Western world to the rest of the world.
To the rest of the world.
And so you've spoken about ideological colonization.
That's right.
The idea that these ideas should be imposed, whether they're wanted or not, on other countries and other societies. What do you think is behind that? Is it, on the one hand, is it a population control agenda? Is it to say that, for example, birth rates are much higher in Africa than they are in the Western world, certainly than they are in Europe and Western Europe? Is it a feeling of the people there are threatened and we must make sure that the population of Africa reduces? Is it economic? Is it the fact that there's money to be made in these businesses, whether it is contraception, sterilization, abortion? They do make money. What do you think is behind it? What's motivating?
This is actually excellent because you've touched on a lot of the various reasons. I think from my own observation and just by studying and looking through what has been happening all these years, I think it's a confluence of reasons. It's not just the one reason. It is a confluence of an amalgamation of various movements and interests. So there are people who are coming at it from the point of view of, let's do population control. So these are the population control enthusiasts. There are the people who are doing it from the point of view of, the green energy movement. They too have their own thing, and they want to spread a certain idea or ideal. There are also the people who are so pro-abortion and so dedicated to the abortion movement, the contraception movement in the West, that they cannot stand the idea that there is any place in the world where people have even an opposing view. Even if it's not in their own country, even if it's not in their own region, they are interested in kind of spreading their ideas, their ideals, their ideologies. These people, I kind of think of them as more evangelistic about it, if I can say that. There are people also who come from this philanthropic point of view. So the Gates, the Clintons, the people who have formed all these foundations that are going to African countries, not really to spread education, not really to bring in water into villages, but to bring in these strange ideas that have come from the West, even if they're opposed to the value system in the various African countries. So these ones I call the philanthropic races, so I take it as kind of philanthropic racism, where they're selecting various African countries to spread these kinds of horrible ideas too.
And is it an advantage to you that you are an African and you are talking about what's happening in Africa in a way that, for example, an organisation, say, like SPUC could talk about this, but wouldn't have the same credibility you would have?
Well, I think anybody, if you are living in the life, in the world that we are living in now, in this era, I think it's actually the obligation of everybody. Everyone has a right to speak up, even if you are from SPUC. If a child is being aborted in an African country because of something that somebody has come from the West to do, or something that they've come to promote, you have an obligation to say. So I'm somebody that I believe that there is a credibility that everybody should have for speaking for the right thing. But the fact that, yes, I'm an African and I get the opportunity and the privilege to speak about these things, I take it as a privilege. It's more, for me, a privilege. But I find that it also has sparked a lot of interest, because when I go home, I can speak in our language and explain to it, to explain to it. I think that's a little advantage I have over SPUC. It's not because you don't have a right to speak about it as SPUC, but it's the fact that when I go there, I can sit on the floor and speak my language and explain to the woman in the village the reason why this is awful, or even they usually know that abortion is wrong. They know that. But it's the fact that I'm bringing this awareness that they should be careful and be aware that there are people who are coming from the West who are thinking for them when they're thinking of putting an IUD into you, and usually wakes people up. So it's a privilege.
So people, you say quite rightly, coming from the West in the form of some of those big philanthropic organizations and NGOs, but you've also talked, and I think you've also written about the government level organizations and the sort of supranational organizations like the United Nations, and many of the agencies of the United Nations. And what have they done? I mean, they've drafted policies that basically support this agenda completely.
Oh, for sure. It was an eye-opener for me that the supranational organizations have become the mouthpiece of one strand of ideology in the West. It's not, it might be called the United Nations.
And so many people think, well, all nations are represented, and surely they can't do things against the will of a group of nations. But what you are revealing is that they do impose an agenda.
Yes. So it's shocking, to say the least, that a United Nations meeting that is meant to consist of the various countries, 190-something countries in the world, they gather together and you're thinking, okay, everybody's interest is being represented, but it's shocking to see that there are the superpowers and there are the voting blocs that are made up of the EU countries who then decide that the rest of the world should take on board healthcare as they see healthcare, which, of course, when I'm talking of healthcare, I mean things like abortion that are then inserted very, very firmly into this concept of complete and let's say comprehensive healthcare. So an EU voting bloc within the United Nations will try to impose, they will say to African countries, if you don't have legal abortion, we're never going to give you a complete full mark. You're never going to be seen as developed enough in your healthcare system because you're not providing this particular service, which is abortion.
So effectively what happens within the UN and some of its organizational bodies is that certain privileges, trade, aid, and others are denied because African countries will not tick the abortion box or won't accept abortion as part of their own national policies.
Precisely. A couple of years ago, I had the privilege of producing a documentary called Strings Attached. There are, in fact, strings attached every time that we speak about funding. Every time that we speak about, the outcomes that are expected from a good healthcare, what does a good healthcare system look like? What does a good educational system look like? But for the people who are at these supranational organizations who are defining the terms and they are setting what is a complete, what is full education is one that has with it also comprehensive sexuality education, for example. What is complete and comprehensive healthcare? That is healthcare that includes abortion. It doesn't matter how good your system is. It doesn't matter how excellent your standards are. As long as you're not providing this, then you are always substandard. You are always seen as substandard. So it's a really horrible thing that when they talk of funding, they would say, but we cannot give you this funding because you're not really measuring up on all the indices and you're not really meeting up on all the targets. And at the targets, someone coming up with something like, for example, they had the Millennium Development Goals initially for a couple of years, and now we are currently on the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDH. And then they bring up something like healthcare within that, or another point of interest is women's well-being, which is also a whole other indicator within that. But then they're saying, well, for it to be complete, it has to have like the so-called sexuality, what is it? Sexual and reproductive health and rights, SRHR.
Yes.
So these are all the things that the UN comes up with, and not just the UN. The EU does it as well, the supranational organization.
So effectively, this is why you talk of colonization.
That's right.
Because it's a new form, but a different form of colonization.
But they are in charge.
But it's still happening.
Absolutely.
And I suppose behind that is also what you might call the cultural colonization,
That's right.
which is Western media, Western news organizations, Western broadcasters who take for granted that these should be the default position and all countries should have that. And they broadcast to Africa and their products are seen and heard in Africa. And all the time, it's an attempt to change what is initially and originally a culture that respects life. And it's trying to undermine and to subvert that.
Perfectly put. Perfectly put. They have defined the terms. In a lot of African homes, in a lot of African, let's say, public spaces, let's say, for example, a banking hall in an African country, there would be a big television on the wall. 9 times out of 10, that's not local news. It might be a BBC. It might be a CNN. So we are ingesting without knowing it, or even without meaning it or intending it. We are ingesting a lot of Western media, a lot of Western entertainment. What is taken as really nice entertainment is like American movies, even in an African country. But what is within those movies? What are the things that they are now promoting? We're finding that a lot of the movies are no longer as harmless as entertainment was in 10, 15, 20 years ago. They're now talking about things, you're having people, they're talking about women's healthcare and they're meaning abortion. If they're talking about like some of the characters, they're LGBTQ, or maybe they're transgender, heroes. They're bringing in these different characters and they're showing it to our African children. Things we never saw before. And someone is like, what is this person, a man, a woman? All of these things are being introduced into African homes directly from Western entertainment industry and the Western media and the Western, cultural production. You can say the cultural production industry that
even though producing the same culture, in Western Europe, for example, has led to cultural and moral impoverishment and a spectacular decline in our birth rate to the point where many people would now say our continent is not sustainable. We have a significant problem with an aging population and a very, very low birth rate. And at some point, something has to give because we do not have enough people of working age. And you would hope that people in Africa would look and say, that's not the road we want to go down.
Precisely. See, the thing is, this is the reality, because all you have to do is just to search for the statistics in public domain. We already have from 2023 the reality that in England and Wales, the statistics showed that there were more deaths than births in that year. That was the first time in 50 years, by the way. And that just happened 2 years ago. That's like some of the latest statistics. So it's very, very easy to find out some of these things. But unfortunately, that's not in the media. That doesn't make it into a movie that is made. It's not. But these are some of the things. We are sitting on a powder keg of gunpowder, and something that is about to explode. So the Africans, they're not really seeing some of these things, some of the I'd say the damages that have been done by this the development of these kinds of culture and ideology within the West that has already caused damage to the West, but then it's such ugly damage, but it's still being closed and it's still being they're still hiding it from sharing it, and whenever anything comes across to the African audience, if and when people get to find out, they're like, no, we don't want this for ourselves.
And are there more voices like yours who are joining this struggle and trying to raise awareness the way you are trying to raise awareness? Is there an audience for what you're saying? Do people want to hear it?
For sure. I'm just one little voice. But mind you, I've had a lot of encouragement and confidence in doing this. The reason being, all I have to do is to speak to one Episcopal conference in an African country. Is to get I just try to get them to invite me for one meeting. And by the time you know it, 20 or 30 African bishops are welcoming the message. Anywhere that I have gone, at high-level meetings, at little churches, at schools and in schools, I've done things at universities, even in African countries. There is always an incredibly welcoming audience and people saying, yes, now we identify with this message. So I find that some of the easiest talks that I've given have been for African audiences in African countries.
And do you find that combining the message with a message of faith helps? Because often here, what we will find is when you make a pro-life argument, people will dismiss it and they'll say, you only say that because you're religious or because it's your faith, as opposed to on any other sort of basis. Whereas, again, a difference would be that the practice of faith is at higher level in most African countries than it is here, where it's sunk way below what it used to be. So combining with faith is a positive and is an asset for you.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, yes, in the UK here, when you say something, you almost kind of self-censor and you're like, oh, let me not bring faith into it so that people can at least take me as scientific and all that. But in Africa, mind you, people are living out their faith so naturally. You talk to somebody, a stranger on the street, somebody selling something to you in a shop, for example, easily. I won't even ask the person, well, do you go to church? Do you believe in God? I'll say, God bless you. Thank God for your life, or something. Somebody can just tell you something on the street. But you ask yourself, well, they didn't even ask me if I go to church. It's that natural that, a teacher would say, oh, God bless this child, and no child goes home saying, mommy, my teacher is trying to get me into church. The faith is almost like the air we breathe. And nobody's asking, what's your faith? People just say, oh, God bless you. Jesus bless you. We talk about it. So of course, definitely it goes without saying that when I go into spaces or when I'm going to different places and I'm talking to anybody, whether it's in a government office, whether it is in a school room, in a university class, very confidently, yes, I can match up what I'm saying with faith. All the more reason why, an African will be, in most cases, will be more compelled when you even say, well, this is actually a moral duty, a Christian duty to take up this defense or, to take it just takes it sort of to the next level. It's not just that I'm doing this as a good citizen, I'm doing this as a Christian.
Yeah, and do you have hope that the next generation, the younger generation, particularly of Africans, will see this and will accept this and will want to stand up for their culture, for their beliefs and for their own traditions and standards and perhaps reject or at least push back on some of what you have described as ideological colonization?
Right. Actually, I'm a little bit reticent. I'm a little bit afraid for the African youth coming up because they are the ones who are most exposed to a lot of the Western developments, So, whereas our parents, many of them, of course, back then, yes, we didn't have internet. So, but now in Africa, kids are holding Facebook in their hands, and what's on their timeline? It's not Nigerian content. They're going through and they're seeing Cardi B. They're seeing like all the rap artists and they're looking at all the new musicals coming out from America. Some of them really, really horrible. Some of them very, very sexually explicit. So I am a little bit, if anything, just a little bit fearful or careful about the African youth and not to take it for granted, because whereas I know I can walk into any office where there are African adults and I'll say something pro-life and I'm thinking, oh, they're gonna embrace me, or they're going to catch the message as I throw it, right? But I cannot say that for a fact if I'm going to go into like an African university classroom where it's the very young or the Gen Z Africans, because the Gen Z Africans are already now being exposed to the larger world. And sometimes perhaps they may not know how to choose or how to St. Paul said, test all spirits, how to discern and say that, there are these two things, but I see that this one is of God and this perhaps is not. So I would not take it for granted that, yes, the African youth, they're going to rise up, they're going to throw this away, they're going to reject this. I pray they do. But for them to do that, I think that it's still a lot more work of awareness has to be done. It's not just my one voice. Speaking up, I think more work has to be done.
Maybe they need to hear how devastatingly dismal it is in many European countries where the birth rate has dropped so far below replacement level now that there are some places in Europe where there's no population and there's very, very little future. And that inevitably is what happens, as it happened in China with the restrictive population control.
In Japan as
and it's happened. And even though they try and reverse it, the die is cast.
Too late.
And it's now too late, and the culture has changed, and it's very difficult to bring that back. Well, for all the work that you do to raise awareness here and across the world, Obianuju, thank you very much, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.